Hello, everybody. Welcome to Medicine and Science on the Pod TV network. My name is Nick Palavita. I'll be the moderator of today's show. And of course, today we have a very interesting topic, an important topic for everybody to listen to, and that deals with something in the medical area, which deals with also vaccinations. We're going to look at vaccination myth and vaccination reality. And with that, of course, we have our speaker for today, and we have our panel who's going to be joining after the speaker, during the time speaker comes in. He's Dr. Patmos, who's board certified in internal medicine, and he's going to give us a little bit of introduction about these vaccinations myth and vaccination reality. So with that, no further ado, Dr. Michael Patmos.
Well,
myth
good
and
morning.
reality.
Yeah. Good morning, Nick, and good morning to your audience. It's always a privilege to be with you. Thank you so much. So today, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the myths around vaccination and to set the record straight. This has been a passion for me since I was a child. I was born in 1952, and I had measles, mumps, and chickenpox, and all those diseases before there were vaccines. I was one of the first children in the country to get polio vaccinated, and I remember other kids in iron lungs. So I've been passionate about this from the beginning. As a medical student, I saw patients die from influenza, young, healthy people. And as a practicing physician for 43 years, I've lost count of how many patients I've seen die from preventable contagious infectious diseases. So I'm very passionate about this, and there's so many myths, and I love myth busting because it's easy. The people who put these myths out there are so undereducated in most instances. Sometimes they're just malicious. They just do it for their own personal agenda, but most of them are just very undereducated, and it's so easy to bust their myths. It's like taking candy from a baby. So let's go through a couple of these easy myths to bust. The first one, and you probably have heard about the spike protein detoxification program. This is getting a lot of play on LinkedIn and elsewhere, and there's a doctor who's out there selling spike detox treatments because the belief is, or his argument is, his sales pitch is, that the vaccine contains this tiny protein from the virus, from the SARS-CoV-2 virus. That's the spike protein. And that when you inject that spike protein, it does bad things to you. So you have to be detoxified from it. Well, let's look at that from a logical standpoint. Yes, when you get vaccinated, you get the spike protein, but you get like 1 grain of sand of the spike protein, 50 nanograms. You want to know how much spike protein you get when you get COVID? The entire beach. You get all the sand, not just 1 grain, everything. So if the logic is that the spike protein is toxic and you have to be toxified from it, go get COVID and you'll have a logarithmically greater amount of spike protein, billions of times more spike protein. So if anybody needs to be detoxified from the spike protein, it would be COVID patients, not COVID vaccinated patients. So the logic of that spike detoxification scam is ridiculously infantile and easy to throw away. So there's that one. There's a few others here. We can go quickly. I found a really good paper called Vaccine Safety, Myths, and Information from Frontiers in Microbiology, written by Paul Offit, who's a very famous, well-known pediatric infectious disease expert. And he went through a very nice article debunking myths. First myth is that we're giving children too many vaccines too soon in life. Well, actually, the amount of immunogenic entities in today's compilation of childhood vaccines actually is there are about 14 vaccines right now in the United States, and they contain 200 immunologic proteins. Compare that to the old smallpox vaccine, the one vaccine that I had in the 1960s for smallpox, contained by itself 160 immunological proteins. So actually, despite the fact that we've had more vaccines, the amount of immunological proteins in those vaccines is far less today than it was years ago with one vaccine, because the vaccines have become more specialized and selective and narrow in the amount and the extent of immunological proteins that are injected in. So that myth is busted. The next one. Too many vaccines early in life will overwhelm your immune system. Well, there's actually no epidemiological or biological evidence to support that. And if you really are concerned about your kids getting overwhelmed with infections, and just send them to preschool. Just anybody who has children or grandchildren in daycare knows the volume of childhood infections that these kids get. So the vaccinations are not overwhelming the immune system. If you want to overwhelm the immune system, go to preschool or be a preschool teacher. You'll find out. Here's one. Oh, my favorite. The vaccine, the MMR vaccine causes autism. Now, this is an interesting one because this paper was published in the 1990s by Dr. Andrew Wakefield. It was a tiny little paper, 12 patients, and it caused a stir. And I got to tell you, all legitimate doctors all around the world were really concerned about this. And it took 10 years and multiple studies to refute it. The intention wasn't to refute it. The intention was to try to corroborate it. And what the studies actually did was refute it. And so multiple large-scale studies, including up to 500,000 children, show no association with MMR and autism. So now what happened to that paper? The original paper was investigated, found to be fraudulent. The doctor made up the data. That paper was retracted out of the literature, and that doctor was charged and convicted with fraud. Despite that, the notion that MMR causes autism has become embedded in the population, and we actually have people running for office for president of the United States still running on that false, fraudulent myth. Here's one. The human papillomavirus the human papillomavirus vaccine, the one that prevents cervical cancer, that one, increases the risk of autoimmune disease. Well, multiple well-designed studies over a long period of time show no association between HPV and autoimmune disease. That myth is busted. And then here's one. The influenza vaccine given early in pregnancy increases the risk of miscarriage. Well, in a study of 2,762 women, no increase in the risk of miscarriage. So all of those myths are busted, easily busted. There's a couple more I want to speak to. There's a myth floating around that vaccines just don't work. They just don't work very well. Well, I have some data for you. Here's the percent reduction in the United States of death. And by the way, for physicians, there's really one endpoint that matters: death. As my mentor used to say, just don't send them home in a pine box. Everything else is a surrogate endpoint. So death, reduction in death, that's kind of a big one. Diphtheria, 100% reduction in death. Measles, 100% reduction in death. Mumps, 100% reduction in death. Did you know you could die from mumps? Yes, you can. Pertussis, 99.7% reduction in death. Have you ever seen anybody with pertussis? I have. It's a cough you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. Poliomyelitis, 100% reduction in death. Paralytic poliomyelitis, 100% reduction in paralysis. Rubella, German measles, 100% reduction in death. Did you know you could die of German measles? Yes, you can. Smallpox, 100% reduction in death. In fact, smallpox is the only disease that has ever been an infectious, contagious disease that has ever been eradicated from the face of the earth. The disease doesn't exist anymore. Why? Because it was only found in humans. So if you vaccinate everybody, you can eliminate the disease from the face of the earth. Smallpox doesn't exist anymore because of vaccination. There are other diseases that exist only in humans, viral diseases, that we could eliminate from the face of the earth if only we could vaccinate everyone. Tetanus, 99.6% reduction in death from tetanus. Hepatitis A, 88.7% reduction in death from hepatitis A. Some people think hepatitis A is benign. That's just a little hepatitis A, no big deal. No, you can die from hepatitis A. Hepatitis B, 83.6% reduction in death from hepatitis B. How did the COVID vaccine fare in terms of reduction of death compared to these other ones? How about better? 95% reduction in death from COVID. That's better than the hepatitis B vaccine, hepatitis A vaccine. So the COVID vaccine, all these vaccines are effective, and the COVID vaccine is very effective. So anyone who says otherwise, they don't know what they're talking about. All right, a couple more, and then I will turn it over for questions and discussion. I saw a thing on the other day on LinkedIn, an interview with Dr. Joseph Ladapo and the guy used to be on Fox News, Tucker Carlson. And in that talk, Dr. Ladapo was fascinating. He went all over the place. It was a little hard to connect his thoughts, but he basically made the claim that the mRNA vaccine, the COVID vaccine, changes your DNA. He's promoting this myth that the vaccine gets into your DNA and will change your DNA and take over your DNA, and that'll increase your risk of getting other diseases like cancer. There's no evidence for that, and it's totally implausible. Here's why. I don't think, if you understand nucleic acids, I have a master's degree in biochemistry with a focus on nucleic acids. Nucleic acids, you go from DNA to messenger RNA, to transfer RNA, to protein. It's in a process of transcription and translation. You can't go back the other way without an enzyme called reverse transcriptase. mRNA will not by itself transcribe back into DNA without reverse transcriptase. There's no reverse transcriptase in the vaccine. It can't happen. So what Dr. Ladapo said is wrong. The thing about clots, you've heard Dr. Ryan Cole talk about clots and showing clots being pulled out of arteries of patients who have died of COVID. Got news for you. When you die, your blood clots. So post-mortem coagulation, pulling a clot out of a dead person doesn't mean that the person died of the clot. After you die, your blood clots. So what we now have is very good evidence that the COVID vaccination actually reduces the likelihood of thrombosis in COVID patients compared to patients with COVID. So if you really want to get a clot, get COVID. If you don't want to get a clot, get vaccinated. And then I'll finish on this one. I talked last week a little bit about the measles situation in Florida, and Dr. Ladapo's actually disastrous and incorrect recommendation that parents, it's okay to send your kids to school if they're unvaccinated and they've been exposed to measles. There's still only 10 reported cases, and it's been 21 days. So Dr. Ladapo and Governor DeSantis took a victory lap the other day saying, see, we were right. There's no measles. Well, here's what's wrong with their very flawed thinking. So the incubation period for measles is 21 days. So if I have measles and you're not vaccinated and you have a 90% chance of coming down with measles in roughly 21 days. While you're incubating the virus, you in turn have a contact with somebody else who's unvaccinated. They now have a 90% chance of coming down with the virus within the next 21 days. And they in turn interact with someone else. And sometime during their 21-day incubation period, and the next person will have 21 days before they can show disease. Each person infected with measles will infect 12 to 18 others who are unvaccinated. There are about 430,000 unvaccinated people under age 18 in Florida. So there's a big population of people who are at risk. For Dr. Ladapo and Governor DeSantis to claim a victory lap now, they don't understand the kinetics of how this spreads. You may only have 21 days to show disease, but the person you talk to or you have interaction with has 21 days from that date, and their contacts have 21 days from that date. So it's not 21 days. It's 21 days from each subsequent contact. This thing with the measles in Florida is not over by any means. Taking a victory lap is very premature and foolish. You have to follow this outbreak out for weeks or months before you can say that it's over. So this is very foolish. I think it just reflects a complete lack of understanding of the kinetics of transmission of infection. So those are, now I'm surprised that they did that in Florida because how do they know that, I'm wondering if they're not going to be counted. I think the people in Florida, if you see anybody with measles, or your child has measles, or you get measles, yes, you have to report it to the State Department of Health in Florida. You also should report it directly to CDC. I'm not sure that they're counting these cases properly, because they're too confident that they're gone. It doesn't make sense to me. I think there's something nefarious going on with that. That's my speculation. Anyhow, that's my comments for today. I'm happy to discuss.
And I want to talk about Florida. Florida has in the past played games with their statistics, trying to hold them back. And all right, Dapo is the Surgeon General of Florida. Charlatan, a fraud. He claims he worked with COVID when he was at UCLA. He did no such thing. He's a lunatic and a liar. If you look at the post-vaccine death rate in Florida, that is, everybody pretty much had access to the vaccine by about April of 2021. Now, before that, Florida got lucky. The Northeast got hit. California, some states got hit harder just due to luck. And Florida was lucky early on. But if you look after the vaccine became available and became politicized, Florida has a post-vaccine death rate of 220% of California's death rate from COVID. So basically, because of politics, Florida killed about 57,000 people who died needlessly.
Rick, I'm loath to say anyone is a charlatan or a fraud. I'll just say he's misinformed.
You're way too nice.
But you are right. So I happen to have these numbers off the top of my head. The adjusted mortality rate for COVID in Florida was 4,400 dead per million people in Florida, per residents of Florida. That makes Florida within the top 10 worst performing states in the country. You compare that to Hawaii, where vaccination was embraced and where the anti-vax movement was largely ignored. And our adjusted mortality was 1,500 per million people, approximately 1,500. So Florida's mortality was 300% higher per capita adjusted mortality. So the numbers don't lie. I mean, that's a dismal performance. You're absolutely right, Rick.
Yeah. When I was looking at some of the studies on this, what I found out is that the anti-vaxxers, which exist today, Dr. Patmos, existed years ago. In other words, this is nothing new. When smallpox vaccination first came out, and VACCA comes from cow, because basically they used cows to inoculate themselves, that there were people that said, oh no, you can't do that, you're touching your body, you're going to destroy yourself. But also it showed that the average life expectancy back then was age 35, and that most people would die of communicable diseases as opposed to dying of today heart disease and cancer. And it wasn't until we had the vaccinations that life expectancy extended to like in the age 70s. But here's my theory behind the anti-vaxxers, which I'm sure are going to be listening to this. There is in DSM-4, maybe 5 now, a little problem, a neurosis called oppositional defiance disorder. Okay, it is my belief that there's a certain amount of people that have oppositional defiance disorder. And if you showed them A, they'll say, no, it's got to be B. It's got to be B. It's definitely not A. So there's going to be a certain group, no matter what you say or talk to, they just won't get it because they actually suffer from oppositional defiance disorder. I don't know what your thoughts on this, but I've talked to a lot of people over practicing law almost 40 years. And every now and then I run into people, I'm just going, dude, you are ODD and you don't even know it. What are your thoughts?
I'm a doctor. I've been a chief medical officer of hospital systems for many, many years. And oppositional defiance syndrome, gee, I think it sounds like you're talking about surgeons. No, just kidding. It's only a joke. Sometimes doctors can be a little oppositionally defiant. But you're right. I remember the ridiculousness of the smallpox, of the vaccine, anti-vaxxers years ago, but it just got fueled dramatically in the political climate because certain political party and certain candidates have recognized that they can leverage this. This is good strategy. You can manipulate the public and scare them, manipulate them to vote for you on an anti-vax platform. And that's really what's driving this. This is all monetary and political, personal agenda driven, and some ignorance. But I think a lot of it is being driven by politicians who are using this anti-vaccine. They're leveraging anti-vaccine fear for political gain. I want to shut up because I think we have another panelist, Kim. I'm curious.
Yeah, Kim's here, right?
Well, unfortunately, my internet was in and out while you were talking, and so I'm going to have to play a lot of this back. But my biggest concern, and I didn't get to hear, you were like in and out with this horrible internet I have. But where we talk about women and how the vaccines impact their ability to have children, or is it bothering them? So many of the women that I knew during COVID, they were just against the vaccine because they were in fear of not being able to have babies, or it impacting how they had babies or the baby. I missed that. So can you repeat a little bit of that?
Yes. So I didn't speak to that issue directly, but there's no question that the COVID vaccination does not harm your baby or your pregnancy. In fact, just the opposite. There's very good data, solid, well done studies, excellent data that shows that women who have had COVID vaccination are less likely to have fetal loss than women who haven't. So if you want to lose a baby, get COVID while you're pregnant. So there's no truth to that. That is another myth that was circulated by these fake experts. I mentioned this last week. You really have to pull the credentials. These people who say they're experts, their CVs are available online. Pull their CVs, review them. You'll find out that their CVs are largely made up and embellished. There's no evidence. And these are the ones who are saying that the vaccine would hurt pregnancy. It doesn't.
So I have a show on this channel where I argue with a conservative lunatic who buys all the myths you're talking about. And he always sends me videos and papers. And they're all done. They're all attempts at doing math and statistics and science by people who can't do that. They all fall apart with it takes me like 2 minutes to see where all the dumbness snuck in. But also you mentioned RFK Jr. You didn't, not by name, but he's the guy who is a vax denier who's running for president. And he's a lunatic. He's a guy. He's 70 years old. He's pumped. He's injected himself with HGH or testosterone. He used to be a heroin addict. So this guy who's needle crazy, as long as it's heroin or HGH, doesn't like getting needles for the vaccine. It's hypocritical.
ODD?
I think worse than that, but that's certainly another story. But Dr. Patmos, I did decide to go and buy this law book. It's called the Merck Manual. It's huge. It's like a law book, Remind me of going back to law school. And it's also available on the Pod TV network. So all you have to do is podtv.tv, go to the bookstore, and you can order the Merck Manual. And I always ask, did you read this? Did you read
Yes, I still have one. And
I know you read that, but do these purported experts, the guys at the diner, do they read this? Or can they not read like some of our politicians?
That's probably all they read.
That's all they read, and then they end there.
The Merck Manual, I don't think your own doctor in 10 easy lessons.
Yeah, I
don't
think half know where it is.
Who needs a resident?
Yeah, I think that people do need to educate themselves, but also you have to listen to the experts. But I also agree with you. You have to look at who is a true expert and who is not, who's embellishing themselves and making stuff up. So not all experts are created equally. Also on this wonderful book, which is Anti-Vaxxers, I thought this is a pretty cool book. I don't think we have it in our bookstore yet, Kim, but it's actually pretty good.
It will be.
They keep the thing is there's this myth out there, and you went over it, that it causes autism. And this horrible paper, I think it was the Wakefield paper, came out in 1998, and people still think. And I don't know if Rick has people that creates autism. And
all right,
nobody doesn't.
So we're all roughly the same age here. Maybe Kim is the youngest, but I'm definitely on the spectrum. But I was never diagnosed because I was born in 1960, and that diagnosis really didn't come into play maybe in the big cities, but until, I don't know, the 70s, the 80s. Like one kid in like 160 now, I think, is diagnosed as being somewhere on the spectrum, having, you know, some degree of autism. But my wife and I were looking through my dad's papers. He was born in 1931, and we're reading his papers, and we're like, holy crap, my dad was on the spectrum, never diagnosed, because the diagnosis did not exist. People say, well, you know, so many people are being diagnosed now because, yeah, we know what it is. Back when we were kids, you were just nerdy. You know, you got pushed into lockers or got a swirly for being nerdy. And it wasn't an official, people didn't understand. Also, autism, they like to say it's caused by the mercury, which is used as a preservative in vaccines. Mercury has been pulled out of almost, even if, A, that's bullshit, B, it's in almost no vaccines in the United States and hasn't been in, what, 20 years? You can...
Right. Yes, you're right. So we see the same thing occurred with prostate cancer. The incidence of prostate cancer jumped up dramatically, about 300% or so, after the use of the PSA tests. You know, so increased sensitivity and increased diagnosis can give you a false impression of an increase that autism has increased. The accuracy of the diagnosis, the recognition of the disease is much greater. I just attended a annual update in internal medicine at Harvard a couple months ago, and they had a very interesting study. They presented a couple of studies about a relationship between autism and the gut microbiome. If you're not familiar with the gut microbiome, it's the 100 trillion bacteria that are in our gut. It actually turns out that there's some relationship between our gut microbiome and the risk of autism. Autism is probably multifactorial. There's genetic influences, inherited influences. There are some environmental influences like to pollution and so forth, but there's now evidence that the gut microbiome plays a role. But one thing we can say for sure, there is no evidence that the MMR vaccine has anything to do with autism. I'm sorry if that hurts anybody's feelings. I know if you have a child, you know, who's got issues, it could be very painful to hear that, but the reality is it's not the vaccine. RFK is wrong, but he made a lot of money with that, and he's using that money now to run for president and generate even more money. And pretty soon we could have a RFK as president and Aaron Rodgers as vice president. Imagine that, a quarterback, one bullet away from the presidency. Hey, we can have some.
So, you know, and there's
Sunday morning football at the White House.
Excuse me.
You know, and he does more than he's spreading fear as well.
Yes.
So, I mean, and we need to stop spreading the fear and just become more informed.
Yes,
And somebody did give me his book to read, but quite frankly, I haven't had time to read it. But all of the speculation that was going around, I had to shut it off because it was hard to listen to that and listen to my doctors at the same time. So I think you're right. I think we're in big trouble if he becomes our president. So,
yeah, but why would you listen to somebody who is not a subject matter expert, opining on an area that they have no clue what they're doing? I mean, RFK, to my knowledge, I could never get him on the stand and have him certified as an expert in anything having to do with medical related issues. And this is the thing that got me about our former chief. He never deferred to a subject matter expert. Instead, he became the subject matter expert. And to my knowledge and belief that they have no background whatsoever in the subject that they're talking about. But anyway, that's
the
they never got certified.
It's even worse than that. Trump fired all of his experts and brought in fake ones.
Oh, that's great and really bad.
He brought in people who had no business talking about medicine and science. No pandemic.
Absolutely correct.
If you look at clips,
we are at the half hour, so we're going to have to go.
Okay,
we're going to have to go, but we want to thank Dr. Patmos and thank you all our viewers in the United States and around the world, because the vaccination problem is not just a U.S. problem. Sri Lanka had a problem because they all of a sudden said, hey, we don't need to vaccinate anymore. And all of a sudden, poof, a lot of people were dying. And so it's a worldwide problem. It's not just the United States. We'll see you next time on Medicine and Science. Take care.
Aloha.